Signori e signori, Caruso, benvenuto all'Accademia Britannica. Io penso che per la maggior parte di questa serata sarà in inglese, e allora ho pensato di cominciare in italiano, ma ovviamente non parlo italiano, ma allora la cosa che forse passa per italiano. Vorrei semplicemente cominciare con una serie di ringraziamenti particolari a tutti che hanno sostenuto questo programma di architettura all'Accademia Britannica, in particolare Royal College of Art, the Académie de France à Rome, Villa Medici, the Kingdom of the Netherlands and the Embassy of Israel, Rome Cultural Department, e anche in sostegno di tutti i trust e fondazioni che ci hanno aiutato nella preparazione di questo programma. Brian Guinness Charitable Trust, Kochme Charitable Trust, John S. Cohen Foundation, Quebec Delegation, Rome Cultural Delegation, and also anche tutti gli amici del Mazzi e altri istituti a Roma che sono stati sempre amici dell'Accademia Britannica in questi programmi di architettura. Va bene, ho finito qua la tortura per voi, passo all'inglese. It's a very great pleasure for me to welcome you all to the British School of Rome for the first in this programme on architecture and the creative process. For us, architecture has had a long and very distinguished role in the academic work that we do, and also the creative work that we do. It forms a bridge between our historical scholarship and our contemporary art practice, and it also forms a really important bridge for us from our place here in Rome to the whole of the city, to the history of urbanism in Italy, and to the influence of that history, be it an ancient history or a relatively contemporary history, on architecture across the world. And being a bridge, we're also proud to be an institution which brings people to the city, and it has been one of the characteristics of the architecture programme at the British School of Rome that it has brought people from across Europe and beyond into this institution and into the city. Those of you who followed our programme for some years will know that we've hosted programmes on master planning in Rome, London and Milan. We looked recently at informal urbanism in India. This programme seeks to harness a huge amount of really exciting thought about creative processes and how they interact with architecture and how architecture interacts with creative process. It's mirrored by events at the Royal College of Art, and we're really thrilled to be inaugurating this with the exhibition and talk that we will have this evening. I wish only to say one further thing before inviting our colleagues for this evening to come to the stage and to talk about the exhibition and the theme of today. I wanted to make a very specific vote of thanks to the curator of the architecture program, Marina Engel, who has worked extraordinarily hard to bring this program to fruition. We're immensely grateful, Marina, to you for the work that you've done, and also really excited about the program that you have curated here and the events that will follow throughout the coming months and years. Marina, thank you. Grazie anche a tutti voi per essere qui, e adesso io passo la parola a Mario Codognato. Mario Codognato is a critical curator based in London, chief curator at Madre, Museum of Contemporary Art in Naples, from its foundation in 2005 to 2012. During his time there, he curated a series of retrospectives, a roll call of contemporary art. Jonas Cornelis, Rachel Whiteread, Thomas Struth, Franz West, and he's also curated exhibitions at the Archaeological Museum in Naples. I think a really fascinating juxtaposition of Francesco Clemente, Jeff Koons, Anish Kapoor, Richard Serra and Selma Kiefer, and the first ever museum retrospective of Damien Hirst. A this stage passo la parola a Mario per introdurre Adam Caruso e Thomas DeMann e questa presentazione su Madame Wu and a Mill from Hell. Thank you.
I just want to start with a kind of introduction to the work that we're going to talk about. In my role as an explainer, facilitator, which is the role the architect often has to take. So, because artists don't need to be clear. Thomas said that. He wrote it. It's outside. So, and this should take 10 minutes or 15 minutes. I first met, Peter Sidge and I first met Thomas DeMann when he came to our office with a problem. He had an exhibition, there was plans for him to have an exhibition at the Fondation Cartier in Paris, and he didn't want to be stuck in the basement where they have walls. So he wanted to make a show upstairs in the more characteristic, well, the characteristic spaces of Jean Nouvel's building, where you can see the show from the street, from the garden behind. But there's a problem. Thomas's work is two-dimensional, and there are no walls in that space. There's only glass walls to the outside. So this was the first time we met with Thomas, and it was the first time he came to us with a problem. And this would be repeated. So we said we knew his work. We were very interested to have the opportunity to work with him, to help him. And we said, give us a few days. And I think we made in a shoebox a very rough model of how the show could work. And we just put these screens in the shoebox with different colors on each side, and then we showed it to Thomas the next week, and he was very satisfied that could work. And that's what we did. We more or less built that. So these are some shots from the Fondation Cartier. This was 2000. And it really did work nicely, and the colors we talked together about, and the position of the openings and the relationship of the openings to the hang of the work. And this was a very, very simple means. I think there were 7 walls. We were able to make a show that had a real narrative of rooms, and which preserved the transparency of the Fondation building. The next time Thomas called us, there was a challenge. It wasn't so much a problem. So he had a show at the Kunsthaus in Bregenz, and he wanted to show a film in the ground floor gallery reception space. And the film was of the Lumiere brothers. It was to do with the Lumiere brothers plate films. It was about early cinema, and this, you were probably pretty clear what you wanted. You wanted the room to kind of appear and disappear as the film went on and off, and the film would be projected from a projector which you would hear in the space. And as often happened, he'd done a lot of research, and he discovered that the Zumthor building actually does have curtains which park between the concrete walls and the glass facade. So I don't think we could use those curtains, but we used that void, we hijacked that void, and we made it slightly crazier than other things that appear in the Zumthor building, track on the ceiling, so that on a kind of even rhythm, you would come in, and then the thing would come into action, and it would make a room, and you would watch the film in the room, and then it would disappear again. It was quite fun. The third one was a show, and I never even saw this one, and I can hardly remember what it was, but it was another challenge. It was at the Irish Museum of Modern Art for a show called L'Esprit d'Escalier, and Thomas wanted to show his film of the escalator next to the main stair of the museum. And he sent me some very fruity slides of coaches from the 18th and 19th century. I was really excited about it, but in the end it was a little bit more abstract, I think, what we did. But it was a kind of machine that you could go into, or no, it was a machine, I think, that held the projector, and then you would look at one side and you would see the film in the space of the stair. Then Thomas had a show at the Pitti Palace in Florence, one of this annual shows that Francesco Bonami does in Florence. And they're in these, I think they're 19th century apartments. They're very pompous. Apartments where you're not allowed to touch anything in the interiors. And Thomas wanted to install 6 or 7 pieces. So we designed these monumental pieces of furniture that would hold his work, but would hold it in a way that made a constellation and made sense in the rooms that we weren't allowed to touch anything. So this was the first room that had the night sky on a kind of a lectern. This was in the big kind of ballroom space that kind of had a bench that had pieces that made a constellation with the mirrors. And then in the last room, a kind of high altar piece. And then in 2009, just as Thomas predicted would happen when we worked on the Conversazione show, which was a kind of dry run for doing a show at Mises National Gallery. So there was this show in National Gallery in Berlin, and it was very exciting for us to try and make an exhibition design in Mises' building, especially since there have been so many terrible exhibition designs made for that building. And the first thing we did with Thomas was this. Actually, we didn't do it with Thomas, but of course he knew all about it. But we looked at almost every exhibition that had been put on in the building. And this is a very early one that Mies designed with these floating screens. Not exactly how you would do a show nowadays, but there were interesting things that the screens held a two-dimensional work, but at the same time, the space of the building still had the transparency that Mies intended. We were thinking about this, the show that Mies and Lily Reich did for the Verkund exhibition, the exhibition of silk and velvet. And we did this show in National Gallery with curtains, with 6 kilometers of curtains. And we managed to make a set of room-like spaces that allowed the show of Thomas's work to really get kind of presence and the narrative going. But at the same time, because they were curtains, there was this reference to Mises' architecture and a feeling of the continuity of this pavilion, enormous pavilion. And we were doing things to engage with the Mises' architecture, slightly destabilizing it, but I think it was also quite respectful. And this was the inner sanctum. It's not the piece that's outside. That's shut. It looks much smaller to National. Okay, then I remember calling Thomas up. He was very busy on something, so it was clear he would agree to almost anything. I turned the tables, and we were invited to do a art and architecture competition in Zurich West, underneath the Hardbrücke, in Escher Wiesplatz, and I said, should we do it together? And he said, when do we need to do it? I said, we don't need to think about it for 2 months. He said, fine. And probably forgot about it. And then we started to work on it, and that's where we did this Nagelhaus, which would be under this bridge. And we had a lot of interesting conversations about what could we find, or what could we transport to this place. And one of the really good conversations we had was about Annie Hall. when Albie Singer is describing to, I can't remember Diane Keaton's, to Annie Hall, obviously, growing up in a house that was underneath the Coney Island roller coaster, and the difficulty of eating soup in this house, which of course would spill, and how living in this condition with his shouting parents was the root cause of his anxiety as an adult. But I guess, this is the sort of thing we had in mind under the Heartbroken. And we had many references going. Thomas did at least, and then I think about 2 weeks before the competition, we had a meeting where we really had to decide in Berlin, and he found this in the news, the Nagelhaus in Chongqing, which is holdout Madame Wu, who was holding out against this shopping mall development. And we were quite inspired. And the two buildings for our project in Eschweiz plots contain that, which would be the Chinese restaurant, and this, which would be the kiosk and the public toilets. So that was the plan. There's the restaurant, there's the kiosk. And Thomas made a fast model, and then we needed to squeeze it and distort it so it fit underneath, fit onto the site, and it also worked with the program, more or less. And then that's the image we made for the competition. And I'll show a quick video at the end, which is very nice. And then in 2010, I think it was, in the Architecture Biennale, we made a fragment of it, full scale. And the week after, there was a referendum forced by the SVP, and the project was killed by 0.8% being against it. And by that time, we always wanted to do it. Thomas felt very ambivalent, but I don't think he was happy with that outcome. It was an incredible waste. And then the last thing, which is in the exhibition, and I won't say too much about it, but it's a kind of totally different relationship. It's us being architects for Thomas. And remaking this building called Hellmill, which is here. Which is in a spot of really environmental protection, very beautiful place, an area of lakes northeast of Berlin. The house was a ruin. There had been a house there since the 16th century, but the house that was actually on the site was largely from the 1930s and had been very heavily Nazified. Then it was used as a youth hostel during the DDR times. It was used for a yogurt ad subsequently. It's very famous for that. You can still see it on YouTube. And then it was really falling down. And so it's full of history, and it was quite unpleasant, you could say, the architecture of the house. And our challenge was to make it into a kind of out-of-town house where Thomas could go swimming, to somehow civilize this quite pompous but also falling apart architecture of this 30s building. So this is a view from the stream that goes to the lake. It had no relationship to the land. It was related to the other direction, to the entrance, which is now looking at the neighbor's land. So one of the things we did was make a new garden room with this new garden facade. And it's slightly inspired by some of the ideas in Thomas's work, in that the new facade is in situ concrete, but actually when you look at it now, you wonder, why did we go to the bother? Because it looks exactly like the stucco facade next to it. But we know it's in situ concrete. This is the front, where we make a kind of court with the new garage. The space between the house and the garage looking to the stream. which will soon have a turbine to generate electricity. That's the Helmut, it's a mill, it's always been a mill. Entrance. In the stair hall, we had very heavy relationship with the monuments people, who were not reasonable, I would say, given that if Thomas hadn't done the work so carefully, the house would fall down quite soon, and they were really giving enormous value to architecture that didn't have such obvious value, but we had to incorporate elements of that architecture. So this room, for instance, was a very heavily paneled room with beams that we had to restore, but we stained them white to make it lighter. But this room is really half from the 30s and half from now. Facade. And the garden room. The dining room that has a special tile floor by a manufacturer from the eastern part of Germany that has a kind of illusionistic pattern. And then going upstairs to this amazing space upstairs, which was really Thomas's idea. I said, no, we're not going to do a double height space, that's a bad idea. And then I realized what he meant, because the roof was off and you could see through the dormer. So we kind of, then I thought, yeah, that's a good idea actually. It's not a double height space, it's another space above the stair hall. And we sort of made this space which is like a drapery hanging from this dormer, which was really designed just to ventilate the roof. The view through the rooms on the upper floor. So let me show this now. So I remember when we presented this to the jury, which included a city politician, we ended by saying what there's no longer room for in Chongqing. The citizens of Zurich can find place for it. So the health and safety is very controlled on this.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to, if it's possible, to talk the conversation between you two by asking you if in 2000, when you did the Cartier Foundation project, was the first time that in your case collaborated with an artist so closely, and in your case with an architect, and if that somehow influenced your respective practices from then on.
We were quite young architects then, but we had just done a collaboration with an artist because we just finished the new art gallery in Walsall, which you visited, I think, before you came to see us, just to make sure. And on that project, the public spaces were done with Richard Wentworth, and that was quite an active collaboration. He's a very different sort of person, and he's older than us, and the way that was. But we were also, you could say, we were facilitators in that. You know, we tried to make space for him to work, and then we tried to make sure it could happen. And we had to do a lot of the advocacy. I mean, he was very good at some of it, but then we had to do advocacy in terms of regulations and things like that. So we had had that one experience.
First of all, can we take off this picture because it's not related to our. When I started, yes, exactly. Maybe even the Conversazione, like the next one. Yeah. For me, I just, like the challenge of the Conversazione was it was a very, very nice and generous invitation by the foundation themselves, because basically they said you can do what you like. And that, at the beginning of one's career, is actually quite an amazing opportunity. And I looked first at the building. John Novell was a great architect, but I wasn't very happy with this idea of how art should be displayed in the space. But I didn't want to make a statement by ruining the space either, which would have been easy by building a big box in there. Or I didn't want to make a rhetorical point about what kind of modernist trope he's kind of employing, and I didn't want to change my work because of John Novell's idea of art either. So I needed some middleman, and I thought like a middleman would be either I kind of make the architecture myself, but then there's no point in hanging any work of my own on the wall, because that would be the artwork in fact. So I needed that like here, like we need Mario. We need somebody who does who plays between the middleman between me and the architecture. And then there were I had a couple of ideas who to talk to, and I didn't have much no knowledge of who else to ask. So I kind of asked actually 3 people in the beginning. I think I was pretty clear on that as well. I asked 3 people, and I just had and I thought I wasn't happy with what they proposed. I was not happy with one of the proposals in the beginning, which I brought to the foundation, and the foundation wasn't very happy with another proposal. They thought it looks like a German war memorial, and that wouldn't fly in Paris. And so we were sitting there, and then I came to you guys, and I thought, I do remember the day when I went to London to present you, or to find out what you kind of came up with. I had a call in the morning from the curator who told me, you can do whatever you like, just, it turns out we need 2 walls in the space to stay. And I thought, here, now every idea is ruined. And it happened that they had a scheme with these walls which were, easily to be adapted to the whole thing. And I thought, that's it. Sometimes you have a destiny, it just works so well, you have to go for it. And so, the one thing you just didn't mention is there's the curtains in the room. It's on the side, and the building is very transparent. It has a beautiful relationship to the Boulevard Raspail, and so we knew that in the morning, in daylight, you would drive into the city, and in the evening, you probably would drive out to the suburbs or something. And so we also played with the color of the wallpapers. We kind of employed wallpaper. We had this kind of totally different appearance of the space at daylight from night. And so there were many aspects in there which were making, we developed afterwards, but it made the scheme so beautifully versatile. And then we could make a narrative in an otherwise open space. We could, there were so many. So in a sense, I just was really baffled by how could they have known of all these problems which I had to solve without even, knowing them. And so that was the beginning of where I just knew that I can rely on them. And they would sometimes it was only conceptual, or it was sometimes a real problem, like a technical problem, like a proportional problem, or a formal problem, and like sometimes it's also just to have a sparing problem. Like the nail house was more like a ping pong play, they played a ball to me, I tried to play back, it came back, and so it kind of built up over the time. So it's very hard to, and then the collaboration also got very integrated, so I couldn't even, of course they would say it's all us, and I would say it's all mine, in the end it's all right, it's a kind of a, and that's the beauty of working with them, because it's not about hierarchy, and it's not about, it can be actually quite open.
But also, I wanted to ask you, since that moment you design a lot of museums and art galleries, this collaboration with artists, and Thomas in particular, did help in sort of reaching a sort of particular sensitivity towards, what are the requirements for showing artworks?
For sure, but I to say two things about that. One is, some artists, and Thomas is one of them, have an incredible intelligence about art space, and I think many artists know how to install their work in a gallery, but lots of artists don't have a clue about architecture. They really don't have a clue, and when we do commercial art galleries, some of them don't do this, but some have shown their artists what we're proposing, and it's always a disaster, because they all say different things, and then of course the directors pick up the things that they use it as an excuse. And that if they wouldn't have listened to any of the artists, it would be fine also. So I think some artists have an incredible, it's not a sensitivity to space, maybe it's a knowledge and an interest in the architecture of galleries. But other artists have none, and I know artists of both kinds. And it's the same with curators, surprisingly enough. I think some curators install shows better than others, but even ones who install shows quite well. I know a few who actually, you get to the end very quickly when you're talking about architecture, something that you're proposing. It's surprising. I think they're happier that the space is there, that they're doing a little bit what Thomas was saying we have to do here, that the curating is a selection and a moderation in a way of a body of work. Peter and I, when we started in 1990, architecture in Britain, and you could say the same thing now, it was pretty horrible. But there was an art scene happening, and it was very exciting. And I remember talking to Peter and saying, this is, and we both were very interested in art. I did art history before I did architecture. Peter did it, but he's the bigger collector. He has more art than I do. So we've always been interested, and we've always gone to shows and talked about shows. We still do. But I remember saying to him, we've got to somehow get connected to this, not as a money-making thing, but this is where the energy is. It's so exciting. So I remember he told me, and it's really charming, well, go meet some artists then. But sometimes, one has a sort of self-fulfilling prophecy. One is interested in something, engages, and then one does start to meet artists and curators. And I guess, if nothing else, quite a large number of curators, at least, and some artists trust us, that we're not going to be, playing empty, rhetorical, whatever, when we're doing art spaces, because for us, that's totally boring. Because we really like going to see exhibitions, and we like being in situations where the institution and the space and artists, they can come together to make something very powerful. We did Nottingham Contemporary a few years ago. Thomas last year had a show. It was the first show with two shows at once where all of the roof lights were open, and it was a great pleasure to see that show because the work was so good, but also it was installed in a way that was really maximizing what the galleries were doing. And Alex Parkinson's consistently, sometimes he's embarrassed when I come to see him. ruined your building. But of course, that was part of doing the Kunsthalle, is that you must be able to do that also. If you're precious about it, it's never going to be enough really good shows.
I mean, it seems to me that, you know, the Cartier and the PT and obviously Berlin, you had a problem with how also to create a background to the picture, how to create walls, and obviously you didn't go for the most obvious thing like building some white panels, and you did some very bold decisions. And can you tell us something about it? How you decided to use, in one case, wallpaper, and in the other case, these sort of wooden curtains and so on?
Well, I realized actually in a show in France, in a basement, I found myself in a group show in the basement, and in a cave, and without light. And it was a piece called Staircase. It wasn't a big piece, but I still liked it very much, and I thought like, this is quite amazing that the work doesn't suffer from that. And I just realized that the work itself, you know, there's a lot of choice and how it can go next to each other. And I mean, the reason why we have this big piece on here is just basically we wanted to show one-to-one thing. We have like all the other things are kind of small representations of the big thing. We wanted to have one slice of kind of one-to-oneness in there. So the work itself is like it's kind of embarrassing to say that, but it's pretty durable as an optical thing. And I just thought I could play with that, and I could try to kind of get away from that white cube, because that white cube always works. You know, you bring it in, you just can, you know, if you put the glass in there and the rest of the white cube, it will be a show somehow. And so I just thought like we can twist this somehow. And then the other thing is I just realized over the years that like if you look at museum proposals for new buildings for museums, what happens very often is that the architects, they choose from the collection of the museum they're supposed to build whatever they like, but nothing else. I had a show in the Kunsthalle Bielefeld once, which is a place by, what's his name? Philip Johnson, exactly. Exactly. And he hated the work of the time. He just hated like anything like Carl Andre is doing or something. So he wanted to make sure that art can never be shown there. And he had canvas panels, which, you know, on the wall. He had like tropical red wood on the floor. He had, you know, it is impossible to show anything because it's way too busy. All you can show is old master paintings in golden frames. And I did a show there. I even did a show there. It was like very funny. But like I realized that, you know, architects very often take the liberty to just determine what can be shown in there. And I think you have a very good example of that in town. And so, you know, like Jean Nouvel, he did a proposal. I looked at all the Jean Nouvel buildings. He had a proposal where he had like a Mariko Mori for a media center. He had a Mariko Mori film. But he, you know, and the main floor was like 8 times the same video next to each other, which of course looks very good in a proposal, but it's not what Mariko Mori would do. She wouldn't show her own film 8 times next to each other. She would show it once. And so, or like there's a museum in Warsaw where they have like, you know, the ubiquitous Louis Bourgeois in the lobby, and I asked, do you have one of those? And he said, no, of course not, but we try to get one then, you know. And so, you know, like even like you just have to kind of come over that hurdle of like, you know, find ways of operating in spaces, and then it becomes, it's not a problem, it's just more also, over the time, you know, like I did kind of some shows without them too, and so I just kind of, you know, like there are things in there where you just kind of, where I try to make every show a memorable experience, where you just realize I just only will have one show in the Self-Plan Gallery. I just want to make this not like, I want to make this kind of that one show which, you know, you just remember because it was a big experience in a sense. And architecture, exhibition architecture, it's very often it's a lot of fun to think about and find a solution together with, you know, them, for instance. But it's also it's a way of like defining what your show should be about and why the show is there, because there is nothing more allowed than, you know, having big crates coming in and being taken out again or something. So, you know, that is basically why I never kind of thought it would be a problem, really. I mean, I thought like with the National Gallery, what you don't see on the pictures, what was nevertheless amazing, was that the pieces seemed to fly on the wall, and it was like, you know, like people wouldn't realize how it works. You know, there you have a curtain and you have a really massive piece in front of it, and somehow it would fly, and then you just pick it, and then it's not even solid, you know. There's no, it is a curtain, and kids could have kind of walked through the thing, and I had like great pleasure in opening the curtain behind the works, you know, because it was actually really magic in that sense, you know, and stuff like that you never see in a museum, and that really you will remember. So for me, that is you know, it's kind of a way of like making sense of what you get as an invitation.
And I seem to remember there was a big challenge because the roof had different heights, and it was very complicated to.
The Mies building roof deflects unevenly, so it deflects between 10 and 80 centimeters or something, quite a lot. And so when Mies did the shows in the 60s with the panels, they often were crooked.
I did research. We had a way that the museum is not very well organized, so you could go on a Tuesday and choose 2 projects from the whole history of 44 years of the National Gallery building, and so we had kind of always go choose 2. And it took us a year, literally, to kind of get there's no book about all the show, anything. So we went every time, and then in the beginning I thought we're never going to end anywhere. And I saw these first photographs of the first show, and I traveled him around, and there was an address of a photographer. And I called him up, and I said, and it turns out that the photographer was still alive, and he was still sitting in his house, you know, sorting his photographs. And I called him, and nobody ever called him before. And I called him and said, like, do you still, we need to accelerate. Do you have more photographs? And he said, like, oh yeah, well, I went to every show until I was retired, which was like 22 years ago. But however, he said, like, he told me about that first show that it was really hard to photograph, and nobody really wants to talk about that. That the Mondrian, it was a Mondrian opening with the panels. And there was only one time in the day when the panels were really hanging straight, and the rest of them, they would go backwards. But of course, that's not part of the myth. That's part of the, like, we forget about this. But like, because the roof goes up like this, and so spending anything in that sense was,
because of the constellation of Thomas and Uwe Kielman, Udo's first big show as director, I think in many other situations they would have said, yeah, there's deflection, it couldn't happen, it couldn't work. But actually it was a very easy thing to solve, and we didn't allow it to stop us. So they're sitting on the floor and they're stayed from the ceiling. They're not hanging from the ceiling because the floor doesn't deflect. So it wasn't rocket science to solve that problem, but it was one of these legends that you can't hang things because there's differential deflection. So it was lucky everybody was fresh and open and wanted to do it. And then we found a way to do it. It's always like that. You can't have naysayers. That's what a fresh institution. And I think that institution wasn't so fresh for a long time. But it became fresh. So we benefited from it.
And coming to the project in Zurich, which somehow reversed the roles almost, how was your working relationship working that occasion?
Well, it's an impossible place. It's a really impossible place. I felt like a therapist. I thought it actually it's a little bit of an insult to ask an architect and an artist to fix a place which is famous for prostitution, drug abuse, and if you really want to get burgled in Zurich, that's the place to go. Yeah. No, it's kind of now it's all sanitized. But in a sense, we felt like the Woody Allen thing is not only because it's very funny, but it's also because we thought we are therapists for public space or something, and so their idea was very early on to kind of do something where the social space would replace the asocial place of the time then, and so we would like to, we were discussing restaurants or something which kind of has its own life rather than just making another fountain. And public art very often has the problem that it's actually requiring the viewer to have exactly the same reaction as inside the museum. So you're standing in front of it, you adore it, you probably kind of thrown over by the sublimity of it or something. But if you go there, and 75,000 people a day go there, you see it every day for 20 years, that effect will wear off. So I was very happy to kind of think about something which kind of has another layer than just, be an adorable art object. And there was a fountain before which kind of didn't do that effect at all, which had to be taken out. So you just, the place has a history of like a disaster in terms of public art as well. And so when they came to us, the first stage, we didn't even give them a scheme or something. We just showed them the piece of the Woody Allen film where the little boy sits in the thing and the soup bowl goes like this, and that was all we had at the time. So I thought like that was very important to kind of know how bad the place was beforehand, and then to try to kind of make something. And for me, it was what we came up in the end was a real a counter insult in a sense. Because we said, like, Switzerland is not only the place of, the globalization is not just going in terms of money from China coming to you and from Angola and from whatever the place. It's also the other way around. Pictures travel and and references travel. And I was looking at architecture which would have a rhetorical thing, and there's this kind of typology of holdouts. They're called holdouts, and they're buildings where somebody said no. Simply, the building says no. I don't want to move for your new plan. And so I was looking in those, and that was kind of how it developed then into going. The Chinese hold-up, because it was a very famous one at the time, but it also had this beautiful story of somebody really not moving, and then it became a caricature and everything. And I thought, like, the caricature gave me the key. It's like the what's the film with Jerry, Tom and Jerry, where the cat is always trying to hit him, and then the mouse comes out on the backside. And I thought, like, oh yeah, now somebody hit Madame Wu's house, and it comes out in Zurich. So that was like my kind of inspirational thread or something.
That's all true. I think the shame, there was the competition, and it was a special kind of competition called a study competition. So as Thomas said, we did an intermediate presentation which was exceedingly conceptual, but it was okay. The jury was fairly intelligent and engaged. And then there was a final presentation where we had the project, and then we won. But then we had to start to work on it, and I think so there was this collaboration for the 8 weeks of the competition, but then we worked for 2 years on it, because we were ready to start on site practically when the referendum happened. So then there were, it's like that with any architectural competition, you know what's powerful and what works at the scale of the competition, but then we had to make it full scale. And Thomas, quite rightly, all of the things that he just talked about it not just being a kind of erratic object because you're going to go by it every day. And I think for him also, not all of a sudden the artist who destroys the models, and makes the photograph first and then destroys the model, so the model isn't a kind of a monument, that he's going to then be associated with a monument in Zurich. And we had a lot of discussions about that, and I think for Thomas that was more difficult than for us, so that in the end, the development of the surface of the thing, it was inspired by some soggy corrugated cardboard outside Thomas's studio, which had the kind of funny association that it was paper, like Thomas's models, but it wasn't paper. It was wood milled to look like soggy corrugated cardboard. That was really funny, and we could mill it so that it looked dented, like somebody had knocked it. So even at the very, very, one-to-one scale, we were still trying to make sure that the themes of the competition, the positive themes, but also the kind of things that we wanted to avoid, like monuments and mostly about monumentalizing this thing, and working on the business plan so that the restaurant actually would work, and that justified the budget going up a bit, and all of that would have worked because it was completely resonant with the gentrification of this area, which is complete now. So this is, it's a totally gentrified area, and so, we were playing with that as well. So the image of the project seems so right, and I think also in the end, the idea of a collaboration where the technique of the project is so close, that was really unique. I can't think of other projects where it was seamless, really. Who was doing what, and yeah, we did the drawings in the end, but Thomas found the guy who could do the programming, who was a little pain to work with, but who was very good, who could do the programming, to do the milling, and then, then together we would have to decide on the resolution of the milling so we could actually afford it. Going between 5 and 4 and 3 axis milling, and then we did a bit of it, and this is the material that the thing would have had. I mean, it's like a ghost because it doesn't have an interior or weathering, and it was. I think we felt reassured by it. Because I remember, because we have to build buildings that sit there all the time. Artists don't. It's a strength of an artist's position, and you don't have to do that.
Well, I was like, one thing was for me, like, if you do an artwork which you can actually sit and eat in, where does the artwork stop? Do you also kind of design the plates and the uniforms, the paper where you get the receipt from, and you just have to. Exactly. You need to find a point where everything it's clear to the people what's the artwork and what's the use of something, and you don't have to and you have to do it in a way which is very subtle and very enjoyable because the thing will stand there at least for 15 years or something. So, and that was kind of for me was important. And the second thing which I wanted to I wanted to make sure is that it has a certain strangeness, which is not only the story, how he got there, but also it doesn't work with the rest of it, really. It doesn't become just another hut or something. And how to kind of play this out wasn't clear. And then we had this, over the time, because of things of like 2 years, there was the SVP, which is a writing party, which became famous because it also forbid minarets in Switzerland. It's clearly outspokenly homophobic, basically. But like that same party was like trying to find a way against this arty stuff, and there had to be a disabled toilet in the whole complex, and we couldn't believe how much it cost like 450,000 euros to have a disabled toilet in Switzerland, where it costs like I think 65 or something in Germany, and probably less somewhere else. And the whole project kind of got blown up. Then they had a business plan. They didn't trust our business plan. They had their own KPMG study or something, and they said like you can't run a restaurant with like 6 tables or 15 tables. How many tables did we have? 15 tables. You have to have 60. And suddenly, if you have 60 tables, you cannot do it with like 3 people in staff. Then you have to have 5 people in staff. If you have 5 people, by law, you need to have different changing rooms for the gender-separated changing rooms. Where to put in this little hut different, suddenly we needed a basement. A basement on that side is just unbelievably complex to do, and it kind of grew out of demands here and there and everything. And we kind of, at some point, the disabled toilet kind of became the point where the SVP could kind of kick in and say, oh, this is too expensive. And then they had a campaign, which I found beautiful in a sense, because they had these posters where they had a golden toilet bowl, and it said, no, what did it say? No to 4.5.
5.9 for a golden shoe.
Yeah, exactly.
But you say German.
No, I don't say
good. No, Geld. Swiss German.
Oh yeah, it's like 4.5 million Swiss francs for a golden ship. Yeah. So something like that, and they was spread all over the town, which was, if you think of Duchamp and the pissoir and the long history, and it's actually quite for an artist to have that free. Yeah, it was quite impressive. So I kind of, in the end, it was quite, enjoyable. It's just like the waste of time made me really furious. You know, so much time goes in because they require these plans to go. Everybody is on board, all the council, everybody wanted this thing, which we thought in the beginning nobody is going to choose. You know, after 2 years of heavy work, and every little water pipe was in the plan. She did it.
And I understand that the restaurant was supposed to be open 24 hours a day, which is rare everywhere. I imagine in Zurich even more. But was that your idea? I mean, I imagine it adds a lot to the whole project in a way.
I mean, the one place in Zurich where you could, I mean, the Helsinki bar is just on the other side of the viaduct, so maybe not 24 hours, but at 3 o'clock there's still things open, only in this part of Zurich. And there's a lot of clubs still north of the Hardbrücke. So it's the one place where there is a 24-hour culture, on the one hand, like a club artistic culture, and then you have Löwenbräu Areal 1 block away, so you also have the most heavy-duty art market culture also. So it's the perfect place for the project, actually. And it's not the idea of having the art and architecture project that was the perfect idea, I don't think. I think it's somehow what we chose to do, and the idea of the restaurant, and all of that really resonated with that moment in Zurich. And that's why a lot of people did support it. You know, a lot of people thought it would have been a really good thing to do. You can't. I mean, you can't, because they just, for the second time, 0.8% of the electorate voted against the football stadium at Hartum. And the rule is that if you have a referendum and it goes down, it cannot be reversed. So, I mean, we wondered for a while, it could have been privately financed, but you can't use public money. That's the rule. It's one shot. There's no going back. So you have to remake. So with the football stadium, they'll probably have a third one, but it'll have to be again for another design that's somehow different.
But I mean, you know, the other thing is like, I'm not so sentimentally hanging on to that thing. But the thing is,
I'm sure the public would wonder as well.
the beautiful thing is like, I don't have a problem with things becoming a myth and like not being there. You know, like somebody hears about that. Oh, there was this whatever, you know, and so it has its own life. But where you can see that you have the Google alert for nail house, which is a term we coined in the whole concept. And so, because like there's the Chinese saying is saying, you know, exactly, it's like something which sticks out, and so you have to kind of be hammered in. And so the word nail house actually kind of appears very regularly in Swiss public world, because like, you know, they refer to that house not being happening, so it became its own little topic, which is very nice. You know, it's a different it's a linguistic kind of impersonation of the project.
And going to that sort of images we saw about the house in northeast Berlin, how was it, to work for what is basically a private project rather than a public project together? Did you work in the same way, or did you sort of have completely different itinerary to reach the end of the project?
I think it was different. You know, we were the architects and Thomas was the client. I mean, I wanted to get Thomas as involved as possible, but he was rather busy that year, making money to pay for the house. And he was also in LA that year, which didn't make it easier. But we did meet, and then quite late, but not too late, we had a couple of very long and productive meetings, and a lot of things were decided at those meetings. Because, you know, every good project has a special client, actually. That's something probably 25 years ago when Peter and I started our practice, I sort of thought you did it in spite of the client, and now I'm quite sure that some projects you do with the client as a kind of neutral force, but really good projects, the client has a very big impact on. And because they're demanding, but it's a kind of very productive demanding. And so I think I was very keen to lever Thomas into that process, even though he was very busy. And I think we did get that. So there were things at crucial times, for instance, that upper space of the stair hall, where he would visit the site and he would notice something that I hadn't noticed, and we would respond. And then it was about the kind of atmosphere of the individual rooms. Because what's special about the house is, we were trying to undercut this pomposity and make it much more of a relaxed country house, more gentle. And so we did have discussions about each room quite separately, which I think a lot of architects can't or don't want to work that way, but I'm very interested in working that way. I think if you can have a house that has 8 different atmospheres in it, that's an achievement, not something to apologize for. So we did talk a lot about each room and how it could be furnished, and and they're outside, we did a lot of perspectives, not necessarily with the furniture that they would have, but really about how you would furnish and live in the different rooms, because it's a bit too big, the house, and that was just a function of it being the size it is. And Thomas actually made it smaller before we started, but
that's a different story. No, but the thing is, for me, it was like I don't need a country house, and I don't even know how to use it. So I might have to, in the end up by changing my life because of that house, because I need to kind of fill it with my exactly. But the thing is, like, I saw that piece sitting there when I moved to Berlin in '95. There's a little lake. I went swimming there. I saw that thing, and I thought, oh well, I come from the south of Munich, where you have like these beautiful lakes, and you have all the villas, and there's no way that you ever get a villa like that, or even get into a villa like that, because you didn't inherit it. It's just you don't that rich and stuff. And the German in the East, it had this moment where suddenly everything was up in the air. You could actually kind of take care of things like that. And so it was there. It was rotting away, and I thought that would be quite interesting. There was a youth hostel. It is actually mentioned for the first time in 1374, which is like really, really old. It is mentioned in Simplicissimus. It's a really old place. In the 30 years old war, they didn't find it because it was so remote. So it kind of was the only the only place where somebody lived there in the wider area. And so it has this kind of weird, wonderful. And then Rilke was hanging out there quite a lot. There is a lot of culture around this whole place with in that area. No one else he had hung out in this one. So you have and I kind of saw this, and then it kind of went back to the Jewish pen because it was belonging to the Rothschilds at some point, and then I thought, okay, now it's gone, and then the guy kind of only wanted to rebuild the next building next door, and then I thought, and then it got on the market, and it has this long thing where you look at something and you think, oh no, I can't do this, and then it just keeps coming back, and at some point I thought, okay, then maybe I have to, this is take it, just shut up and take it, and so I took it, but then it was a ruin of the 20 years old ruin, and I spoke to the monument people, and the monument people, they said, we know that it's an old house, we know that you have the old plans, and we know that you could, this was in the 50s and everything, but actually we think the most important era is the 30s, and then the start work on the facade, most of it is fake, in fact. It's just like to make it a Black Mountain forest house aesthetic or something. And I said, look, this is fake, and I'm not going to rebuild a Nazi dream, And then they said, well, man, you have to accept that is an important time of our republic and our history as well. And I thought, oh man. And so how can I neutralize that, make it still kind of take it on, and just make it into something else, And that was basically the problem in this case. And it wasn't even that I wanted to have, I still don't know exactly what I do with this, but it's just, I think there's something about the house, and it's, now it's back in the game, and it will be there for the next 50 years, and then who knows. But that, for me, it's also like a little bit more of an abstract thing, not so much a private house. And I think that we have like 3 projects in the thing. One in the show here. One is like the National Gallery, where they kind of clearly worked as providing the architecture, the exhibition architecture. The other one is the relation between the client and me and the architect in a very classical way. And the third one is a complete collaboration where you just can't really say we did what, besides that I didn't make the plans, but So in a sense, that's why we kind of conceived the show, and of course it's very abstract in a sense to kind of decipher what is what, but there's a text at the entrance.
Can I ask you, because we are in Italy, so it's very much an Italian problem, how do you took the challenge of showing the Palazzo Pitti? I know you sort of mentioned it, of course, while in the presentation, but I imagine for a lot of us it's important because one is faced with this. How do you relate to such sort of dense historical architecture to present an exhibition of contemporary images?
Well, one thing you might have forgotten, I'm not sure whether it was so clear. The thing is, I got the invitation to do this in the apartment of Vittorio Emanuele. So it was it was supposed to be the apartment. So there were you can imagine it's not so much it's actually a living space. So the idea was, and we couldn't touch the walls at all. We couldn't even take the carpet out, nothing. And the carpet was covering the terrazzo, but they were very uncompromising, in fact. And so the idea was that, the idea they came up with the furniture kind of was basically kind of coming out of the complete refusal of having anything physically touching the architecture, which is, important, I think, to note. And then the other thing is what you don't see on these photographs, how do you call the first panels of the whole first, the height of the floorboard, basically, higher. Well, the plinth is 130, so basically the architecture starts at that height. It's not like that you can, even if you find a way of hanging something, it's always going to be you look up, it's way too high. It's a tiny spaces, but they're huge and massive. So how to get a presence in the thing? And I just kind of wanted to do it. I thought this is quite an amazing, unforgettable experience. But then how do you handle the whole space? So
but that's half. I don't know, are you asking how do you deal with architecture like this?
I think you did in a very, very original way, and especially.
But I guess I don't have.
Confronted with this kind of.
And then you do. Yeah, but then there's the classic new and old, which is it comes from Scarpa and things like that. And I like Scarpa. That was in the 50s, and I'm not very interested in new and old. I'm interested if you're working in a 19th century, and it's not great architecture. So it makes it easier actually. It makes it more irritating, but it makes it easier. But I'm interested in all kinds of architecture, and then I'm interested in making things which somehow resonate with that architecture. And so they were sort of hilarious, these rooms, and so we did something which is quite poppy in a way, although it's brown. We're making these slightly giant pieces of furniture, which they're not correct in the rooms, but they're correct in scale. They're correct in the rooms, and they were able to make a position to put Thomas's work. We have to kind of mangle. We had to make these frames on the back so they could stand there. And I remember you were a little bit nervous about it. And Thomas isn't usually very nervous about kind of holding the work in an unconventional way, but here, because none of us actually knew what it would do to the scale of the work. But I think in the end it sort of worked. Francesco was also nervous. Everybody was nervous. I wasn't nervous, but everyone else was nervous. But then we had to do it, and it was done very fast. And it was on for a month or something. So we all thought it could just be buried if it was really bad.
And so basically, my idea in terms of pictures, maybe that should be talked about as well. The antichambre, which you look at here, is this is the sense, you go up in the first floor, and I thought it would be a sense of orientation. So the piece of furniture here is more like a map you have somewhere. And the picture I put on there was basically very conceptually, very simple. It's like the constellation in that space in 400 years' time. So if you would stand where you're standing and you would look up into the night space, you would see exactly that constellation of these stars as they are. Basically a science fiction piece, but it's a black piece of paper with holes in it, and it's not after a minute you just realize that as well. Only that the position of the holes is exactly predicting the future in a sense. And then, in a place which is old and past, I thought that would be kind of a nice part in the beginning. And then the next pictures were trying to kind of pick up something from the ornamentation in the space and just kind of answer it with like works I did already at the time, so it wasn't made for that. And in this space, it looks at a photograph much bigger than it is. It's a tiny little space, and then we wanted to break the symmetry, the kind of swirling around of the big chandelier in the thing, and so we have obviously the little the cleavage there, and then we have the roundness of the recount in which the work is called pole, and the small repetitive kind of patterns. So in a very weird sense, this kind of piece of common politics is becoming.
And there was a bench facing this piece, so there was also a piece of furniture that had no right.
And then in the last one, I just realized that everything is about treble here, and that it's kind of elevation. So you have you have angels and clouds and goddesses kind of flying in the fresco on the ceiling. You have like kind of like in this Noah somewhere. And the whole thing, everything is about like elevation and like trembling away. And I had the feeling, I wanted to make a piece for this one, which kind of picks up on the iconography of the place. I don't think anybody besides me got that point. But like I found this picture. I thought like these pictures are like where people go on a plane. You see them every day. Like every day, like at least the Air Force 1 and 2 are flying somewhere. You see either Obama or Biden landing somewhere and saying hello. At that time, it was George W. Bush. So I had piles of photographs of George W. Bush landing in Atlanta, waving the hand. And then I looked a little around, and then I found one of the Pope. I think it was the Pope landing in Berlin or something. And I thought that was so beautiful in a sense, like the Pope landing in Berlin, or just like departing from Berlin and waving goodbye. And he's kind of going in, the door will close, and that kind of answered, in terms of iconography, to whatever was on the wall, which nobody would look at anymore. So, in a sense, like we tried to kind of make a show out of what this thing was, but nobody would ever decipher that.
We knew it was the Pope, and that's why we made a high altar piece for it,
Which we thought was really funny.
Very much. It was very successful. I understand you want to show us some films.
Oh, yeah. No, I don't want to show you films, but if you want to see films, like a friend of mine, it's actually a fantastic artist. We had this show in the National Gallery. So we had this show with the curtains and everything. I asked these books in the show. I didn't want to have like little labels next to the works, because I thought that my work sometimes needs a comment. I don't think it needs a comment, but it has a certain background, where it comes from, where I can find my pictures. And in a sense, I didn't want to have little labels next to a show which would have around 100,000 visitors, which would explain what you see on the pictures. But I thought that would just, it's stupid. And it was clear that the museum educational service would kind of demand those explanations. And I thought I would have liked to have explanations by someone else, which actually, literally, everybody can realize that they're so subjective and they're actually not true, in a sense. So I asked a writer, quite a famous writer called Bodo Strauss, to write me texts, and it was like a totally different generation. I never met him before in my life. He didn't want to do it in the first place, but I knew that he can get something out of it. He could do it, really. And so we had these books, and I didn't want to have them next to the work. I just wanted to have them so everybody who was interested could actually see the neighborhood, the relation to the works, and make sense of it. So we had these vitrines for the books, because he's a writer. I wanted to keep it in the book. I didn't want to kind of abuse the text. And they would basically be 30% enlarged versions of the catalog you could buy at the front desk. And then I came to a Kittelmann. Kittelmann said, Strauss is never going to do this. And so I convinced him, and we were sitting together. Most beautiful. These are the things which nobody can share. But like these are the perks of like doing a show at the National Gallery. And then I had another kind of idea, which was like we had like all these kind of spaces, and we had one space where we killed the symmetry. You killed the symmetry of the building, and because we made one of the pavilions, 2 pavilions when you come in, disappear. And we had this space, and I thought we could probably show films in there. And I didn't even know where and how and stuff. And I asked Alexander Kluge whether he would be interested in to kind of, twist the whole thing another time. And then Udo said, like, come on, nobody's going to follow you in that one. It's going to be, the people will just not get it, so just, But then, of course, Kluge had the films. And I couldn't say, Mr. Kluge, I'm really sorry, but like my director said, So we had these films, we showed them in the second iteration, the show went to Rotterdam from there, and we had the films in Rotterdam and not the text. So, it had a certain point that and they all made to the same idea of the National Gallery. And the idea of the National Gallery for me was, I just pompously said, like, okay, we have a show, Thomas de Man, and the title of the show is the title of the place. So if you would do a show at Maxi, it would be, Thomas de Man Maxi. But that would be fine and everything. In the case of National Gallery, of course, it's a whole different game. And I thought, like, that would be really funny. I mean, not funny, but like kind of weird. If an artist, a middle-aged artist, is doing a show called National Gallery and he shows only his own work, and he shows basically what he thinks is the National Gallery, and that was, I just choose from all my works, just only works which would be connected with the German history. Germany, the show was at that time, was the 40th anniversary of the National Gallery, and 60, it was the wall coming down, it was the Chancellor got re-elected, it was like all these anniversaries at the same time. And so we thought 60 years of wall coming down, of the founding of the Republic, and 20 years of wall coming down. It was really weird, and I thought, like, you cannot not do a show like this. You have to go for this. And so Kluge's films are all relating to that theme. That's why I'm kind of pointing it out. It's called National Gallery. They completely don't have anything to do with my work in the first place, but they're really beautiful, and you can only see them here. And they're very short. Like, some of them are 30 seconds. I think the longest is 5 minutes, maximum 5 minutes long. So, shall we? And there's only 5 out of 12, so I won't waste your time with much, but some of them are really beautiful. I mean, they're all beautiful, but some of them, some of them are like just vague short haikus and. Sorry, just hold on 1 second. And we're showing these films until everybody left the building, so. The first one is about, this is a very silent film. This is Alexander Kluge filmed this in the pavilion, in the Chancellor's Pavilion, which is that roof, which is basically like a predecessor in terms of architecture to our exhibition scheme. It's also like it's like a glass bungalow, and the Chancellor is living there usually when the capital was still Bonn. So, and Alexander Kluge was behind the press people at a reception in the bungalow. He said the life is being guarded by the politicians. He keeps on going, his wife is coming into the whole thing. Can you... Is it off? No, then let's take the next one. So obviously this one is like you watch representation being made. That's the idea. You just see how the people you know from the press, somehow in relation to the people from the press, you know, kind of play and construct the image of that. So in the sense that it was like, it wasn't Helmut Schmidt only, and then there was a head of state and a foreign minister, but it was Helmut Schmidt in quotation marks, and that was, I believe, for the people who kind of, you know, obviously might not know all the things in here, all the faces. So the next one would be, so this is next one has more narrative. These films run on a loop on monitors, like the monitors outside. So this was about like an optical. I think we should either kind of finish or ask questions if there are some, and let this can run in the background.
Does anybody have any questions? Qualche domanda?
Thank you very much for your attention.
This part of the play question is basically a staging and illusion and your interest in, and that comes very in the process of illusion staging, which I mentioned you see how that process is architectural concerns, but just when you think about the project fair, so just these things talking about, it's very important that the artwork is where the artwork generally. I just wondered, like, when you go into paragraphs, how important the environment is to you, both and where it starts and where it ends, and how you draw a line on something. Sort of quite famous.
So the question was like where, because you didn't have a microphone, where when coming from the Nail House, where the project, where I was like very clear, this has to stop here, this is the artwork, and everything else is everything else, and you have this kind of clear autonomy of the artwork in a museum pre-established. That's one of the parameters of a museum space. In a public space, you don't have that. And the question was,
Grazie.